Fascinating inyan in this week's Parsha, Parshas Yisro, regarding what is the relationship between a baal keri and learning Torah. Aser, mutter, what exactly is going on? So l'chayra, kipshutai, you would look at the psukim in this week's Parsha and you would say, okay, what's the shaila? It's very clear. Go to the people, you have to be mekadesh them, they have to be metire their clothing, they'll be ready for the third day, etc., etc. And then the Hemshech says, he said to the people, you have to be prepared, you have to prepare for 3 days. Don't go close to a woman, which Chazal, Mefarshim explained to us, means not to have marital relations. Etc. Then on the third day was the Kalis Brakim, etc. When you just read the psukim, at this pasuk in particular as is, it sounds like, at least at first glance, that it's talking to the men, and it's saying you need 3 days of precious in order to be roy for Kabbalah Satira, to be in a state suitable for receiving the Torah. You have to be completely separated from your wives for 3 days. But that is not how Chazal understood it. As a matter of fact, it was not for the men that they were told to separate for 3 days. It was for the women. And Rashi brings it right here. Rashi says, Al tikshu elisha kol shleishis yamim halalu. These 3 days of preparing for Matan Torah do not have marital relations. Kidei, why? In order sheyu anashim toivlis liyamashlishi b'tiyena tahiris lekabel Torah, so that the women should be able to be toivel for the third day, and they will be tahar to be mekabel the Torah. And before I continue the Rashi, I'm going to tell you where Rashi's coming from. It's actually an explicit Mishnah. It's brought in Shabbos, Perek Omer Rabbi Akiva, the 9th Perek of Shabbos, and Daf Pei Vav. Says the Mishnah, Minayin lepoilet shichva zera, b'yom hashlishi shitmeya. How do we know that for 3 days, if a woman has that the semen fluid exits her body, because the halacha is by tumah, that tumah bebeis hastarim is not metameh, as long as it's inside. So there is exeris hakaz that Rashi points out elsewhere that bia would be metameh, also the isha, that marital relations. But once that's done, and now the zera is inside of her body, so then kolzman tumah blua, when something which could make someone tummy, for example, if someone somehow swallowed a sheretz, right? So once it's swallowed, it's swallowed. It's not going to be metameh him while it's swallowed, because it's called tumah blua. It's called absorbed or hidden or covered up tumah, meaning it's completely subsumed inside of something else. Now, what exactly is, if it's inside of a cup, is that called tumah blua? No, I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole discussion. But says the Gemara that if the fluid comes out within 3 days, meaning 3 full days have not yet passed, how do we know that it still would make her tummy? Because it says, be prepared, prepare yourselves for 3 days. Now we go back to this Rashi, and Rashi says, if they would have relations within 3 days, then maybe the fluid will come out of her after she already toiveled, and it'll make her tummy once again. But once 3 full days have passed, so then the zera becomes non-viable. It rots, so to speak. It becomes non-viable. It's no longer called zera because it can't create an embryo, and therefore it no longer could be metame. So first of all, just in Pashup Pshat, these 3 days where it says don't come close to a woman, it's not talking for the sake of the men. It's dafka for the sake of the women, so that the women should be able to be tahiris. That's number one. That being said, we see very clearly that the Torah was particular, that everybody should be tahar from Tumas Keri for Matan Torah. So then the question is, does that carry on? Does that carry on? So we all know that in Maseches Brachos, it talks about a baal keri, that he's not allowed to daven, and he's not allowed to learn, etc. However, it's very clear from the Mishnayos, it's very clear from the Gemara, that this was not a halacha deiraisa. This was not a biblically mandated law. This was a takana of Ezra. Ezra made a takana that if someone becomes a baal keri, he's not allowed to say Dvarim Shebekdusha. There are exceptions, if let's say he has to bench, Shema, etc. But generally speaking, if someone is a baal keri, he has to taivel before he starts involving himself with Dvarim Shebekdusha, Torah, Tefillah, etc. However, if you take a look in Maseches Brachos, Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, and then Daf Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, the Gemara brings the following brisa, and this is how we paskin lahalacha. Says the Gemara on Brachos Daf Chaf Beis, Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Hoya Omer. He used to say, it's that Hoya Omer means this was something he would chazer over. He would repeat this many times. Ein divrei Torah mekablin tuma. Words of Torah do not accept, they do not receive, they do not become ritually defiled. You can't make words of Torah time. What exactly does that mean? So the Gemara tells us, the Brisa tells us a story. One time there was a certain Talmid Chacham, a Talmid in the Beis Medrash. He was mumbling instead of saying the words clearly. He was reading the words in a very mumbling way, not really enunciating them. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was there. Amar Lei, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira turns to this Talmid, to this student, and he says to him, Beni, my son, Psach picha v'ya'iru dvarecha. Open your mouth and your words will illuminate. They will shine forth. She'ein divrei Torah mekablin tuma. Words of Torah do not become tummy. Shene'emar, how do I know that? Says Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, because there's a pasuk that says, Haloi kaidvari ka'esh ne'um Hashem. Behold, my word is like fire. So says the Almighty. Just like fire cannot become tummy. There's no such thing as fire becoming tummy. So too words of Torah do not become tummy. And if you go to the Gemara as it continues, it's clear that what Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira means is that a baal keri is allowed. He is allowed to learn Torah. Now, whether he's allowed to daven, that's a whole machlokes rishonim. There are some rishonim that hold that it was only regarding learning Torah, that the final psak of the Gemara is that a baal keri is allowed, and that there's no restriction on a baal keri from learning Torah. But when it comes to davening is different. Lehalacha, when it comes to the psak halacha lemaisa, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, like the rishonim that say that whether it's for learning Torah, whether it's for davening, a baal keri is allowed. And if you look at the Rishonim, they basically sum it up that even though the later Bezdins, the general rule is like this: if a Bezdin learns up, makes an inference from a pasuk, or uses one of the rules of exegesis of drasha, of darshaning the Torah, that from which we derive halachas deiraisa, biblical laws, so then as long as you have a Sanhedrin, a Bezdin shall kol yisrael, a Bezdin, which obviously we don't have from the time that the Gemara ended, but when there was a Bezdin shall kol yisrael, when there was a Bezdin that was the top Bezdin of the entire Jewish people, which was called Sanhedrin, so then they can re-legislate, they can relearn it up as they see fit. However, when it comes to enactments, when it comes to decrees, when it comes to rabbinical decrees and enactments, something which is not a halacha deiraisa, it's something that they saw fit to make a special fence or to make a special requirement rabbinically, then the rule goes like this. A later Bezdin can only change that decree if they are greater in wisdom and in number. Now, what exactly number means, that's a whole discussion in the Rishonim. But we're not going to get into that because obviously this is taken for granted that there was no Bezdin that came after the time of Ezra that was as great as the Bezdin of Ezra. So the way they explain it is based on another rule. That the rule goes like this. If a Bezdin, if a Sanhedrin makes a takana, makes a gezerah, a decree or an enactment, and for whatever reason, it does not wind up sticking, it doesn't wind up getting accepted by the majority of the Jewish people, then it's null and void. That is the general rule. So the way the Rishonim speak it out is that Ezra's real reason for making this takana was not because there's something inherently wrong with a baal keri to be learning Torah. There was another reason, which I don't want to get into now because that would require an entire extra discussion, which is a great discussion, fantastic discussion, but I want to try to keep it focused, for now at least. So that takana was for a different reason, and it didn't wind up spreading for whatever reason. It didn't wind up taking hold, and therefore the later Chacham were able to say, look, we're not going like this. And that is the bare bones psak halacha. Now, there is a fascinating statement, at least I found it fascinating, of Rabbeinu Bachaya in his Sefer Kada Kemach. Rabbeinu Bachaya says as follows: V'dar yadua, it is a known thing, it's a known thing, she'ein hatahara v'hakedusha mitzuya elo b'kiyum haTorah v'mitzvos. You want purity, you want sanctity, that is only through upholding Torah and mitzvos, studying Torah and performing mitzvos. She'hatahara dveika b'Torah, because purity is bound up with, it clings to the Torah. It is glued to the Torah. Shekain Amar David alav hashalom tehillim, Yiras Hashem tahira, oimedes lo'ad. The awe of the Almighty is pure, it stands forever. Ki'ilu Amar, what this means to say, explains Rabbeinu Bachaya, oimedes tahira lo'ad. It stands pure forever. Kalaimar, meaning, Shatahara devekaba loy siparid mimeno. Purity is bound up, it's glued to Torah. It cleaves to Torah, it cannot separate from it. This is what Chazal meant when they darshaned in brachas, that drasha that we just brought from Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira, that Torah cannot be makabel toma. And therefore, what he was telling this Talmud is, you don't need to worry. You don't need to worry that there's something wrong with you learning Torah, with your Torah learning. Torah is this, it's a fire. It is inherently pure. It itself brings purity. So that's one step forward. It's one step deeper in understanding what exactly is going on over here. That it's not just that Torah has a quality that it doesn't, for example, something which is not a vessel, something which is not a receptacle, if it's just an object which was not made into a kli, into a receptacle, cannot become tamei. So you might have thought, okay, maybe that's what the Gemara. No, it's deeper than that, says Rabbeinu Bachaya. It's that Torah is the antithesis of Tumah. Torah is bound up. The Tahara cleaves to it. Purity comes through Torah. So therefore, obviously, basically what it's saying is that the quality of fire is as if the Gemara said that it's like a mikveh, it's like a mayon. You can't be metame a mikveh or a mayon. A mayon and a mikveh make things tahor. So Torah is tahara. It cannot become tummy. Now, the question that we could ask though is okay, if that's the case, that Torah is inherently tahor, inherently pure. Purity comes through Torah. And therefore, there's nothing wrong with, there's nothing lacking. There's no pagam in the learning of a baal keri. So, what was going on by Matan Torah? What was going on when we stood by Har Sinai to receive the Torah? Why this tremendous kpeda that Hashem was so particular, as it were, that everybody, including the women, should be tahor. So one approach, I saw a lashon of Rav Tzadok HaKohen Milublin, that I can't say 100%, but the way I understood it is that he was explaining it like this. There's the before, and there's the after. Before Klal Yisrael were makabel the Torah, before it became theirs, so in order to be able to be fitting to stand by Har Sinai and receive the Torah, they had to purify themselves because it wasn't theirs yet. It wasn't part of them yet. It was not built into their blood, so to speak. But once the Torah was given, so Kutshabrichu Yisrael Ve'iraisa Chadu, like we all know that famous statement that HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael and the Torah, they're all one. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah. It was a marriage. He married. So if that's the case, you could understand, okay, the before and after. Before, you're not yet there. It's not yet yours, so you have to make yourself fitting for it. So therefore, you have to toivel yourself. And he compares it to someone who is born not Jewish and wants to become Jewish, so he has to toivel himself first in order so that he could become a receptacle for that. Fine, that's certainly at least to my mind, is very easy to understand. But I was thinking that maybe there's another pshat that could be said over here. And it occurred to me based on something that I heard from my Rebbe, Rav Moshe Torsky, Hashem Yikam Damai, many years ago, that he made the following statement. He said, we know Hashem is Avinu Malkeinu. Hashem is our father, Hashem is our king. And he's always our father, and he's always our king. By the way, there are many other expressions of the relationship between Hashem and Klal Yisrael. We find, for example, when it comes to Matan Torah, Chazal say it was like a chassan and a kalo. Shir Shirim, a husband and a wife. We find that Bani Matam L'Shem Elokeichem, your children. Avodaihem, they're my servants. We also find a lashon of brotherliness that were kaviyachol like brothers. Where does it say that? Re'acha v're'a avicha. That Hashem is your friend. Friends, brothers. So there's many expressions to and many manifestations, as it were, to the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. But very broadly speaking, perhaps the relationship characteristics that stand out, generally speaking, the most are Avinu Malkeinu, Father and King. And of course, He's always our Father, and He's always our King. There's never a time where, okay, right now He's our Father, right now He's our King. However, said Rav Torsky, sometimes we emphasize and focus in on the King relationship, the King characteristic, and sometimes we emphasize and focus in on the Father aspect. And the examples that he gave were davening and learning Torah. He said davening, we know from the Gemara, from the Paiskim, from the Halacha, that there are halachas that govern how you're supposed to be dressed, how you're supposed to stand, what you're allowed to do. Are you allowed to sneeze? Are you allowed to cough? All these different things. Why? Because davening, Shemona Esrei in particular, is characterized halachically. It is defined as Oimed Lifnei HaMelech. You're standing before the king. That's why there are laws that govern how you dress. There are laws that govern how you have to stand, you have to bow, etc. So when we're davening, prayer, we are emphasizing and focusing in on, we're standing now before the king. The king, so to speak, is holding court, and we are entering before the king as we're holding court. So for example, if you imagine you have a child of the king, so the king doesn't always hold court. When he's not holding court, he can, to a certain extent, be like a regular person, a regular parent. But imagine the king right now is holding court. And a child, let's say he's a 15-year-old son, barges in and says, hey, Pops, catch, I want to play with you right now. The king would have no choice. Once upon a time, when there was actual royalty, according to the rules and regulations and demands of royalty, he would have to have his son locked up in a dungeon for a certain amount of time. He might even officially, have to say off with his head or something like that. But then, of course, find a way to get a legal loophole, to get out of it. But the son can't be chummy with Pops when Pops is the king holding court. However, continues Rav Torsky, coming back to that, when it comes to learning Torah, so the way he put it was that when you're learning, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mipiv dasu suno. Every time you're learning, you're always getting it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not that Hashem just let it go, and then it's like, okay, here's a book. No. As the Rambam puts it, He and His wisdom are one. So every time you're learning Torah, you are having a profound encounter with the Almighty. Mipiv dasu suno, from His mouth, as it were, is knowledge and understanding. So every time you're learning Torah, you are interacting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're having a profound, deep encounter with Hashem. But that encounter, the nature of that encounter, said Rav Torsky, it's like a father and son learning across the table. Meaning it's very relaxed. We're emphasizing the father part of it. So I was thinking that perhaps based on this foundational idea, we could suggest the following. When you're learning Torah and you're with your father, so to speak, you're Hamish, you're comfortable. It doesn't have to be formal. So, if there's a stain on your shirt or, maybe your nose is running and your hair is disheveled, and it's okay. A father, that doesn't bother a father. Of course, a father, to whatever extent that he can, will help the child wipe his nose and, help him with his hair. But if for whatever reason it's not possible, the kid just tussles his hair, and makes more mucus come out of his nose. There are kids like that. It's like they're always got that permanent runny nose, or whatever. They always have the stains on their shirt. So the father's not going to say, oh, look, I can't spend time with you like this. This is not, if they're, some people maybe they're particularly sensitive and maybe istin is okay, but that means that there's something that they have a challenge with. But in terms of this essential nature of a father-child, a parent-child relationship, a father wouldn't say, oh, you don't look put together enough, so I can't be interactive. Of course not. What is that supposed to mean? So that's why, even if he's a baal keri and he has his tumah, no problem, because you're kaviyachol sitting across the table from your father and learning with your father. But when they were at Ma'amad Har Sinai, it was an encounter of nevuah, meaning, yes, it's true. When we're learning Torah, we are definitely having an encounter with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's mipiv das svuna. It's He and His wisdom are one, and you're getting it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That being said, the form in which He gave it to us is not a form of direct prophetic communication. Direct prophetic communication means that you are now basically an open vessel, and Hashem, as it were, is talking directly to you. Whereas when you're learning Torah, the form in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it to us is that there's this matter, so to speak. There's this knowledge that we can relate to as if it is some type of objective, concrete, independent reality. We use our minds to understand it as best we can. And of course, we know that we're only going to get proper understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there helping us and feeding it to us, as it were. Whereas prophetic prophecy, nevuah, which is what Ma'amad Har Sinai was as prophetic of an experience as there possibly could be. It was the only time that the Jewish people as a whole experienced the level of prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, where there were absolutely zero mechitzos mavdilos. There was absolutely no blockage between seeing the full grandeur of the divine presence, as it were, and hearing and being communicated with directly without any intermediary or any type of filtering going through there. So that, perhaps we could say, is a form of royal endeavor. That is an event of royalty. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that nevuah is a bechina of malchus. I looked around a little bit, and I think that there is an often araya, a clear-cut proof for this assertion that prophecy is royalty. If someone who is receiving a prophetic communication from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that means that right now it's similar to davening, that you're oimed bifnei HaMelech, you're standing before the king, and therefore those rules apply. So if a person is a baal keri, that's just simply inappropriate. It's like coming in with a huge stain on your shirt, or your hair tousled, or the mucus go running out of your nose because there's tumah there. So what do I think is the proof? The Gemara in Megillah, which is already in Yonah D'Yemah, we're within 30 days of Purim. So the Gemara in Megillah Daf Tesvav says on the pasuk, "Vatilbash Esther Malchus." Esther wore royalty, which Pashup Shad, simple, straightforward understanding. You learn, what does it mean, royalty? It means that she put on her beautiful queen clothing. But the Gemara darshins, wait a minute, Big Day Malchus mi baile. Well, why does it say that she wore Malchus? She wore royalty. That's how you talk? You should say she put on her royal clothing. Big Day Malchut. Amar Rabbi Lazar. Why does it say it in this seemingly strange way? Of course, on the surface level, it means that she put on her queen clothing. But why does it say it in this way that she wore royalty? Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, melamed shalavashto ruach hakodesh. That the divine spirit, the prophetic divine spirit, enveloped her. She was enclosed, as it were, by the divine spirit. So you see very clearly from this Gemara that Ruach HaKodesh, Nevuah, is a bechina of Malchus. So then it makes sense. Like Mordechai said, you can't go El Shar HaMelech Belevush Sak. You can't go wearing sackcloth to the gate of the king. If you're appearing before the king, if your encounter is in an encounter where the emphasis is on Malkeinu, is on our king, so then of course you have to cleanse yourself physically, cleanse yourself spiritually, and appear before the king properly. So I was thinking perhaps that's another explanation, and I think that is exactly how Rashi is explaining it. Because if you look at Rashi, going back a little bit, on Pasuk Tes, Rashi says that Moshe Rabbeinu brought back Divrei Ha'am, the words of the people, to Hashem. Tshuva al davar ze shamat mihem sheretzonim lishmoya mimcha. Moshe Rabbeinu reported back to the Almighty, I heard from the people, they want to hear directly from you, God. They don't want me to just be the interpreter. They want to have this encounter with you. It's not similar hearing from the messenger, hearing from the king directly. Hearing from the king directly. Ritzaynenu lirais es malkeinu. We want, the people were saying, to see our king. And then Rashi continues, Hashem said to Moshe, they're going to have to pray with us. If so, that they're forcing me, so to speak, they're telling me that they want me to talk to them directly. Go to them and tell them that they have to prepare. So you see very clearly that the reason why Hashem told them that they can't be baal keri, neither the men nor the women, is because they wanted to have an encounter with the king, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu as king. So because that prophetic, that absolute level of prophetic, any prophetic encounter, but in particular, this prophetic encounter was an encounter of royalty. It was an encounter where the emphasis is very starkly on Malkeinu. The king is holding court, and therefore you have to be cleansed, you have to be ready, you have to be dressed properly, you have to be clean physically, spiritually, etc. Now, there's a fascinating Keser Rosh, which is, if you've ever seen the Siddur Agra, I don't know if it's in every Siddur Agra, but at least in the Siddur, in some versions of the Siddur Hagra, there is a small contrast, a small pamphlet in the, I don't know if it's all the way in the back, I think in mine it's somewhere in the middle. It's called Keser Rosh. It's basically a compilation of many different ma'amarim and uvdais van hagais from Rav Chaim Volozhiner and the Gra. So it's on a bunch of different topics, and it really has some amazing things in there. If you've never taken a look before, I strongly suggest get your hands on a Keser Rosh. It's not that long, you can skim it, and there's fascinating things. So one thing in particular that I think is relevant to this whole sugya, this whole topic, and it's also very relevant for the Shaivivim. The Gra, the Keser Rosh says as follows. So this is in Hilchos Tshuva U'Maisim Tovim. It's in paragraph Kuf Lamid Gimel 133. A response to someone who stumbled in the iniquity of keri, practically through iniquity, which not exactly sure what he means by kimat bepesha. Does he mean that it was bemazed, that it was almost fully bemazed? Not clear, at least to me. To me, it's not fully clear what exactly he means by kimat bepesha. Excuse me. Listen very carefully, because this is, at first glance, an astounding statement. I mean, at first glance, it's an astounding statement. So someone who stumbled in the sin of keri, kimat bepesha. Again, what exactly that means, each person will learn up on their own. But if he is involved in Torah, he does not need to be worried at all. Interesting. It goes on. He asked his Rebbe, this is referring to Rav Chaim Volozhiner, he asked his Rebbe, the Gra, one time about this. and he showed him statements in the Zohar and in the Sifrei Musar that are very machmir about this matter. Shetzarach lisbol yisurim koshim chamurim merutim. It's not clear. The print is not so clear. Kamavis, he's going to have terrible suffering. Ve'in takono ki'im b'misa mamish, and the only real correction will be when he finally dies, which is fascinating because if you look at Rabbeinu Yochanan and Shari Tshuva, the only thing that Rabbeinu Yochanan and Shari Tshuva says that the kapara, the full atonement for it comes only when a person dies is only one thing, Chilul Hashem. So I don't know if this would square. I mean, then again, it could be that Rabbeinu Yochanan. Okay, that's a whole question. Generally speaking, when you have things in the Kabbalah that don't necessarily square with, let's say, Talmud Bavli, Paiskim, so that's a whole shiloh. The Magen Avram talks about it, the Mishnah Berurah talks about it. Okay, that's definitely not for now, but it's a fascinating statement. Ein sham shenemar va'afar acher yikach aval. Then he says, but. Here comes the but. Here comes the aval. However, b'sayfa ma'amar b'tikunei zar nimtza davar toiv lemevin. At the end of that whole piece in the Zohar, that says the Keser Rosh, in the name of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, saying in the name of the Gra, there is a davar toiv, a good thing, which l'chari he means an encouraging, uplifting thing for those that understand. Which by that he means it's easy to miss it. If you're not paying attention to try to understand what it means properly, you could miss it. Shekosav v'tikun chaf alif v'chaf beis. In Tikun 21 and 22 it says, Avalei raisa b'Torah oirech yomim b'yamina. Length of days are in its right, etc. Pirush, what does that mean? Shematzeles min amisa, that it saves one from death. Ubismaila oisha v'chavod, and on the left of Torah is wealth and glory. Shematzeles min yisurim koshim kimisa, that it saves you from sufferings that can be as difficult as death. And the Sifrei Musar, for whatever reason, didn't bring this, but says the Gra. That's why I said that if a person is involved in learning Torah, doesn't need to be worried at all. Now, I don't know about you, but that gives me pause. I can't help but wonder. I mean, would the Gra have said that if someone murdered another person? Would he have said it if someone ate chazer? I mean, you can't compare murder to chazer, but still, would the Gra have said someone ate chazer? Came out amazing, like almost on purpose. No, you're learning Torah. You're not got to worry about that. I mean, it's hard to imagine. I don't think anybody would say that. If a person, I don't know, was so careless with Hilchos Shabbos to the point where he practically on purpose violated Shabbos. Oh, you're learning Torah, no problem. I mean, what does it mean? Like, if you're learning Torah, so, okay, you get out, it's like you're playing Monopoly and you have that card, the get out of jail free card. Like, what does that mean? I'm supposed to understand this. So, I'm going to provide some sources now, but I would like to make the following statement before I move on. I have a lot to say about this particular topic, and I've written a lot about this topic, and I've spoken a lot about this topic. However, I'm not going to say it in the context of this video for one very simple reason, because the last time that I spoke about this topic, there was a lot of, let's put it this way, a lot of unpleasant fallout for myself. I got attacked, and I don't particularly enjoy getting attacked. I don't know how many people do. Maybe Donald Trump enjoys getting attacked because then he can, return fire, but I don't like getting attacked, and so I'm not going to say everything that I have to say on this topic. If you are interested in hearing what I have to say on this topic, and I would like to mention that I have run my thesis, so to speak, by very chashuv rabbanim, including Rav Yitzchak Breitowitz, and the reason why I'll mention him by name is because I'm humbled and very appreciative that he gave a full-throated haskama to a sefer that I'm working on, which is actually already available in English, and I'm working on putting it out Siyata D'Ishmaya in Lashon HaKodesh here in Eretz Yisrael. But that being said, if you would like to hear more about this and what more sources and explanations. So feel free to get in touch with me. My email address is rbsa, that's like Ramat Beit Shemesh Aleph. You could guess where I live. rbsa613, like Tarek Mitzvahs, at gmail.com. Again, that's rbsa613 at gmail.com. If you're interested, feel free to email me. And bli neder, I will make a private recording that if there's enough people. If it's only one person, so you'll forgive me, I'm not necessarily going to make a private recording just for one person. But, if there's enough people that are interested, so I will bli neder make a private recording that I will share with those people and not put it up on, the more public forum, etc. So, but coming back, what do I think I could share that hopefully I won't get attacked? And if I do get attacked for this, I mean, shame on people who would attack me for this, because I'm only going to be speaking out sources very, very, the most reliable sources that there could possibly be. I mean, the Rav Chaim Volozhiner, the Gra, so far, I didn't add anything onto what they said. I simply read it and explained it to the best of my ability. And if people have a problem with that, well, I guess for that I am willing to take some flack. In any event, so what could be the pshat? Like, it doesn't make any sense. If you're learning Torah, you can do whatever you want. You can eat chazer, you can be machal Shabbos, you could kill people. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It needs a pshat. It definitely needs a pshat. So like I said, Baruch Hashem, I do have a lot what to say on this topic, but for now, this is what I'm going to say. There's a fascinating discussion in the Paiskim, in the Rishonim, in the Paiskim. What's the pshat that honey, bees honey, might be wondering, bees honey, what does this have to do with bees honey? Well, listen in. It gets interesting. What is the pshat that the honey of bees? Okay, so we know that the general rule is if something is a byproduct of a non-kosher creature, it is not kosher. So for example, camel's milk is not kosher. Pig's milk is not kosher. It is yotze from a tatame. It comes out from a non-kosher creature. Therefore, it is also tamei. It is also not kosher. So why is the honey of bees kosher? By the way, how do we know the honey of bees is kosher? Can anybody think of a source? So you might say, what do you mean? It says zavat chalav udvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. So I actually do think that there are some mefarshim that learn that the honey is bees honey. But as we know, Chazal, all of the mefarshim, the honey that the Torah is talking about is date honey. Maybe fig honey as well, date honey. But at least one source that comes to mind, right off the bat, is that one of the battles that Shaul HaMelech and Yehonasan and Klal Yisrael were waging against the Plishtim, so Shaul had decreed a fast. Yehonasan didn't know about it. They were starving. They were out of energy, and he came across a beehive in the forest at some point, or wherever they were going, and he took some honey and he ate some honey, and he restored his energy. Now, so we know that honey is, now why is it? The explanation is because it's not something that is produced from the body of the bees. It's that the bees are putting it inside of themselves and making it. It's like they're making it, but it happens to be that they're making it inside of themselves, but it's not a byproduct of their body. Okay, fine. That's as far as the pure honey is concerned. But wait a minute. A lot of times, if you look at raw honey, you'll find little pieces of the bees, little legs, wings. Those are for sure not kosher. So what gives? What gives? Now, there are some shittas that hold that you have to strain it. You have to filter it. Get that stuff out. But there are others that hold that that's not the case. And why is it not the case? So some Rishonim say, because the legs and the wings, they don't have anything to them. Let's put it this way. If you take flesh from a non-kosher animal and you freeze dry it to the point where there's nothing left there, halachically we would consider it not. Now, if you could reconstitute it, then not. But if, let's say, it was dried out to the point where there's no way to soak it in water and reconstitute it, we treat that like wood. Halachically, not scientifically. This is halachically, it's only considered meat so long as it has that meaty characteristic to it, at least to some extent. But once it gets completely dried out, it's like wood, it's like dust. So some Rishonim say the legs, the wings, there's no meat. That stuff is like wood and dust. So it's not kosher to begin with. It's just schmutz. That's all it is. Other Rishonim say, no, that's not the pshat. There's a different pshat. The Rosh in Maseches Brachos in Perek and Mavarchim, Siman Lamed Hey, if you want to look it up, again, it's the Rosh in Maseches Brachos, Perek and Mavarchim, which is the 6th parak, if I remember correctly, I think it's the 6th parak. In Siman Lamed Hey, says as follows: Sharei Hadvash, im nofal boi chaticho shel iser. Honey, if something which is usser, which is not kosher, falls into honey, and it dissolves into the honey, no way to get it out, you're done. It's there. Nope, you're not done. Since the nature of honey, says the Rosh, and by the way, he's quoting Rabbeinu Yonah, since the nature of honey is that it turns that which falls into it into honey, meaning it completely nullifies the reality of that which falls into it and completely subsumes it into itself. Excuse me, I see that I've got to plug in my phone or else it is going to die. And I would not like it to die while I'm giving this talk. Pardon. All right. Are we plugged in? We're plugged in. Baruch Hashem. So since honey, says the Rosh B'Shem Rabbeinu Yonah, the nature of honey is that which falls into it, it turns it into honey. And therefore we look at it halachically as honey, mutter, and it's mutter. Okay, what on earth does that have to do with what we've been talking about up until now? Says the Chafetz Chaim in his introduction to Likutei Halachos. Yes, the Chafetz Chaim wrote a sefer, actually it's a series of svarim, called Likutei Halachos, which is his pirush on Masechtos of Kachim. So the Chafetz Chaim writes as follows. Please follow, because this is fascinating. I mean, at least for me it is. Says the Chafetz Chaim in the very first paragraph of his introduction to Zvachim in Likutei Halachos. Baruch Hashem Elokei Hashamayim Elokei Haaretz. Blessed is God, the Lord of heaven and the Lord of earth. Asher nasa lanu Torasei HaKadoshah hachamuda mikol chemdo. That he gave us his sanctified, his holy Torah, which is more dear and precious than any precious thing in the universe. Uchedichsiv, as it says, hanechemodim mizahav umipaz rav. It is more precious than gold and a huge amount of paz. What's paz? Maybe another type of gold, maybe platinum. Umesukim midvash v'noifes. By the way, if what I just said makes absolutely no sense, then just disregard it. I don't know what paz is. Maybe it's a type of gold. Umesukim midvash, the pasuk continues, it is sweeter than honey, v'noifes sufim, and the nectar that comes from the flowers that give forth delicious nectar. Ubiurai. What does this mean? Says the Chafetz Chaim. Kipai binyanei ha'olam yeshnei mine devarim taivim. In this world, there are two types of good things, of fine things, helpful things, of valuable things. Echad mitzad hashivui ve'echad mitzad mesikusa. One type of good thing is in terms of its value, and one type of good thing is in terms of its sweetness. So I think that in our vernacular, the way we would define what he's saying is that there are certain types of things that provide us benefit through their functional value, and there are other types of things that provide us benefit through their pleasure value. Tahainu, zav upaz, rav shavya. Gold and paz, so that's very valuable. Rav ma'oy, exceedingly so. Avalena masaklal, but it's not sweet. Doesn't give pleasure. The pleasure is abstract, because what's happening when a person, let's say, has a room full of gold? It's actually interesting because I one time saw, I think in Likutei Maharil, but I'm not sure, that Rabbeinu Tam, sometimes when, let's say, he was feeling tired or worn out, he would take a pouch of gold coins, put it on the table in front of him. It would kind of waken him up, make him excited and happy, and then he would have koyach to learn. He would have energy to learn. So, without a doubt, people get happy and feel pleasure in amassing wealth. And, if a person has a bunch of gold bars and, he opens up the vault and he looks at all of his gold bars, but that pleasure is not inherent to the gold. The gold doesn't inherently convey and provide that pleasure. What it does is that it's an abstraction, because the person realizes that this gold gives him potential access to purchasing things that could bring him pleasure, could bring him convenience, could bring him power, etc. So it's the functional value of the gold which makes it worthwhile to us. But it's not sweet. There's no direct pleasure characteristic in the gold itself. Vitvash, when it comes to honey, udavar masik, it's sweet. When you put it in your mouth, it gives you direct pleasure. Your nerve endings pick up and process that as pleasurable. Aval shavin, shavyoy eno kolkach. But in terms of its value, so yeah, it does have some value, but you can't compare it to the value of gold. So the primary benefit, the primary interest is the inherent pleasure, quality, sweetness that it has. The Torah Seinu HaKadoisha, now coming back to the pasuk, says the Chavetz Chaim. So our Torah, yesh bo shtei mailos. It has two wonderful characteristics. Tahainu sheshavya rav me'oid. Its inherent value is exceedingly great. Yoiser mizav upaz, and that's true both on the this worldly plane, societal plane, as we know, that when a Torah guided society, if it's done the way it's supposed to be done, will function in a very smooth, successful way. All the laws that govern monetary issues, all the laws that govern interpersonal interactions, the laws that govern property ownership, etc., 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 it makes life, it makes society run well. And as we know that the modern day Western culture is largely built on the precedence of the governing rules that the Torah gives us. And of course, on the spiritual level, what it gives us in terms of fixing us spiritually, healing us spiritually, uplifting us spiritually, all those things are very functional value. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, it doesn't stop there. The Torah also has this characteristic of sweetness even more than honey and nectar. In the light of the wisdom of the Torah, there is a power of sweetness. That's the way he puts it. Koyach mesikus. A power, a characteristic of sweetness. The light is sweet and good to the eyes. The Isa b'Medrash Tehillim. It says in the Medrash on Sefer Tehillim, Rebbe Omer, Ma mesukim em dvarim an mimshalim la'or. What is that which is sweet? Those words that are likened to light. They are analogous to light. Shenemar ki ner mitzvah v'Torah or. Because a candle is a mitzvah, Torah is light. The light of the Torah in the upper world. It's not like light in this world that gives you the functional benefit of illuminating things so that you can see and you can move around without tripping and falling and banging, etc. But you don't taste sweetness. You don't experience direct sweet pleasure from the light. Once again, you can certainly get pleasure from the light, but it's much more in an abstract way. It doesn't have that immediate pleasure, visceral pleasure characteristic to it. But the light of the Torah, someone who merits to see it, to truly connect with it, who masik gamkin ma'od, it also is exceedingly sweet. And now this is why I brought this, okay? So please pay attention. So if you were kind of spacing out a little bit, now's the time to kind of zone back in, okay? Why does it specifically talk about honey? As we know, there's other things. It could have said nectar, it could have said sugar, whatever. Why specifically honey? Ki yadua sheyesh b'teva hadvash koyach hamasikus godol. It is known that the property of honey is that it is exceedingly sweet. It is a very great power of sweetness. By the way, I once read or heard about a type of honey which they have to like climb down this incredibly dangerous cliff to get honey, which is incredibly rare, and it's so powerful that if people are not careful, they can get a high from it. So, another thing to be aware of, and this is like a well-known thing, is that a lot of the honey on the world market is not honey. It's a little bit of honey mixed with a lot of water and a lot of sugar. So that's just something to be aware of. If because a person tasted honey, I don't know what the Chafetz Chaim is talking about. It's so sweet. First, you have to make sure that what you're having is the real deal. It's the real thing. And then of course you have the other issue that if the bees are being cultivated in a place where all of the flowers are the same thing, because let's say they're cultivating the bees right next to huge orchards of 1 or 2 or 3 types of trees. Well, that's not really the way it works in nature. They go to this type of flower, then that type of flower, then a third type of flower, and a fourth type of a flower. So if you really want to know what real honey is, so you gotta get the real thing. I think what is it, New Zealand or Australia, something called Manuka honey, is supposed to be like incredibly high quality honey, and then there's of course that other one. I don't remember if it's Japan or Thailand or wherever it is that, like I said, they have to climb down a cliff to get the honey. In any event, honey has this tremendous power of sweetness, to the extent that if something falls into it, lechem, like basar, bread or meat, and so on, and it stays there for a long, long time, eventually it will turn into dvash gomer. It will completely get absorbed. It will, by the honey. You'd have to leave it there for a long, long time, obviously. But eventually, it will get completely subsumed by the honey and become honey. It will become part of the honey. Says the Chafetz Chaim, according to the majority of the Paiskim, according to most of the Paiskim, even if something usher falls into it, even if something non-kosher falls into the honey, like we just saw from the Rosh, it turns into 100% heter. Something which is totally mutter. V'zeu she'amar ha'kasuv she'koyach mesikus ha'Torah hu gadol harbe yaisar midvash v'neifes sufim. That the power of the sweetness of the Torah is much greater than honey, than nectar, dahainu, which means im adam shoyked ala Torah. If a person assiduously applies himself to studying Torah, umizdabek bakaroi, and he clings to it properly, afilu in teva nafshoy hoyametchila rameoid, even if his nature was initially very, very evil, very, very bad, koyach haTorah metahartoi umikadashtoi, the power of the Torah will purify him, will sanctify him. Remember the Rabbeinu B'chai that we said, that the Torah itself is the source of purity and sanctity. V'nefach liyos ish acher mamish. Just like the honey turns the Isser into heter, so too the Torah can turn a person who is totally off in a really bad state into a completely different type of person. V'zeu ma di'isa ba'avos u'machsharto li'osadik chasid yasher neman. That's what it means in Pirkei Avos when it says that the Torah, it is machshir him, it kashers him to be someone who's righteous, pious, ehrlich, upright, trustworthy. So it would seem, I think, that the Pesach, the opening to understanding what the Gra meant, what the Keser Rosh means, that someone who was nichshol in keri, he stumbled in the aver of keri, kimat bepesha, again, almost bemezid, practically bemezid, whatever that means, he's involved in Torah, doesn't have to worry at all. I think that this is the opening salvo to understanding that, because there is a quality to Torah that has the ability to flip something, to turn it on its ear, that it started off as tameh, it started off as ra, and the Torah can flip it. Now again, I think we would all agree that it's taken for granted that that doesn't mean that someone who learns gets a free pass. So what exactly does it mean? Okay, I'm going to I'm going to leave it for that, like I said, for now. I'm not going to say more than what I said in this context, but there's a few more points that I'd like to add. So point number one is this. There is another statement of the Gra. This is brought in Evan Shlema, if I remember correctly. Evan Shlema is one of those Svarim, which is a collection of statements from the Gra. So the Evan Shlema, if I'm remembering correctly, he's going on the Gemara that says that for people who are Maiminimba, people that make themselves on the quote-unquote right side for Torah, so the Torah is a Sam Chaim, it's an elixir of life. And for people that are Masme'ilim ba, that they make themselves lefty, so to speak, in the Torah, so it's a Sam Mavis, it's an elixir of death. The Gra, I don't remember if he's going exactly on that Chazal or if he's going on a different Chazal, but certainly what he says is certainly the way of understanding that Chazal. He says as follows. In numerous places we find the Torah analogous to water, that it's likened to water. It goes to the lowest place, to the humble people, it's like rain, etc. Ya'arif kamato likhi, etc. Says the Gra, when the rain comes down, when the water comes down on the ground, what is going to sprout up out of the ground? Whatever's there. If there are seeds of thorns and thistles and poisonous weeds, well, if you water the ground, that's what's going to grow. And if there are grape seeds or wheat kernels or apple seeds, etc., that's what's going to grow. Says the Gra, the power of the Torah is to grow whatever is in you. So if what's in you is bad midos, it's going to be an elixir of death. If what's in you is good midos, it's going to be an elixir of life. Which is why it says in Pirkei Avos, Haskin atzmacha lilmay Torah, you have to fix yourself to learn the Torah. Meaning you got to make sure that your midos are in line first, and then learn Torah. Now, so first of all, we don't find, it doesn't seem to be part of our tradition that we have to spend 5, 10, 15 years studying Sifrei Musar and perfecting our character before we ever embark on learning Chumash, learning Mishnah, learning Gemara, learning Halacha. That's number one. Number two is that, wait a minute, didn't we just say, and the Chavetz Chaim is not the only one that says this. I mean, he's quoting another Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, that there's another Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says that the Torah itself kashers him and makes him into a righteous, pious, straightforward, honest, trustworthy person. And the Milos HaTorah, which was written by the brother of the Gra, goes on and on and on about this. So what's going on over here? Does the Torah make a person from bad to good? Or will the Torah just grow all that bad stuff which is in him and be an elixir of death for him? So this is a pshat that I thought of years ago, and I still think it makes sense, that if a person schleps his bad midos into the learning, so for example, he's having it out with his chavrusa over pshat and Rashi, over pshat and Tosfos, and like the Gemara says, what's going on in his brain is that I want to show everybody that I'm the best. I want to put him down so that I can show off to everybody and I'm the top gun. So he's schlepping his bad midos into the learning. The learning is being driven by his bad midos. Then that means that those seeds of thorns, thistles, and poisonous weeds are right there in his soil while he's pouring the Torah water all over it, and that is what's going to grow. And it's just going to get worse and worse. But if a person, let's say he knows, I've got an anger management issue, and I've got issues with arrogance and a whole slew of not the most admirable character traits in the world. But you know what? Right now I'm learning the daf. Right now I just want to know what's pshat and Tosfos. And he just kind of like lets his bad midos kind of like, you guys just sit over there on the side, wait for me, I'll come back when I'm done learning. And it's not, so what's going on is that the learning is not mikoyach the bad midos. The learning is that he wants to learn. He wants to learn Torah. He wants to learn because it's a mitzvah, because it's enjoyable, it's geshmak, misukim midvash. It's the most geschmack thing in the world. So then what he's doing is that he's basically, saying, all right, right now those bad, poisonous, harmful seeds, they're not here right now. So what's left? What's left is the goodness that everybody has in him. So then the water of the Torah is watering that goodness, and eventually will strengthen it so much that the Surmei Ra will happen through the Aseh Tov. So that's one point that I wanted to mention. Now, another point that I would like to mention, I'm really deliberating whether I should read this or not. I'm going to read it. I genuinely hope that I'm not going to have to suffer as a result of reading this. And I'm not going to explain more than simply just translating the words. Meaning paraphrasing, but I'm not going to add my own commentary. I a little bit feel there's part of me which feels like I probably should leave this part out, because this is already going to probably upset a lot of people. You know what? I'm sorry. I am going to leave it out. It's just the last time it was just too annoying for me to deal with. So, like I said, there's a lot more to be said on this topic. A lot more. And if you are interested, if enough people are interested, you could email me, and bli neder, I will make a private recording for that. Thank you for listening. If you find this material, if you like my style, if you like the content, please smash that like button. Click the follow button, click the bell button. I don't really know why you have to click both. I mean, the like button, it's nice. I assume also the algorithm, it helps it, that people are interested in this, and then maybe somehow shows it to more people, whatever the case may be. And the follow, I guess the follow is, I don't know, why do you need follow and bell, but that's the way they do it. So the follow button, the bell button, and of course, share it with friends and family, and have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. Thank you for listening.